For most whites in Atlanta, these spaces belong to them as a racial birthright. What spaces? The public spaces like the pools, the parks, the playgrounds, the tennis courts, and the golf courses, which in the early 1950s had been exclusively for whites in Atlanta. But as time moved forward, Negroes found ways to make those spaces available for themselves as well, which the whites absolutely hated. We're studying from the 2005 book, White Flight by Dr. Kevin Kruse. Order. But whites' sense of ownership of these public spaces went much deeper than that. As they saw it, whites paid the vast majority, or in some interpretations all, of the taxes in the city. So their logic was they paid the taxes paid for the public spaces, and therefore those public spaces belonged to them. Whites alone had paid for these public spaces, they argued, so whites alone should be allowed to use them. On the surface, it seems logical for them to believe that way. If they paid for it, then they should control the use of it. But the issue is that these were public spaces, not private. And in addition, although they likely paid for most of it, they didn't pay for all of it. When the city opened these public spaces to blacks, whites felt that their belongings and their birthright had quite literally been stolen from them. During the colonial era, it was whites as free and blacks as slaves. Then after slavery, whites picked the parts of the public for themselves, and they told blacks the parts that they could use. But now when we get into the 1950s, whites are being told all of a sudden that they have to share these public spaces with blacks, which went completely against what their consciousness was used to experiencing. That consciousness had been built on always standing above blacks. So when they were told to share, it felt like their God-given position, their birthright, had been taken from them. To be sure, because of discriminatory policies of public and private lending institutions and real estate agencies, comparatively few black Atlantans owned their own homes. In direct terms, therefore, only a small portion of Atlanta's black population paid property taxes, but indirectly, through often exorbitant rental payments on their homes and businesses, blacks did contribute their full share to the city's tax base. So they did in fact contribute to the funding and maintenance of the public spaces, although not directly as much as whites. Still, white Atlantans assumed that they alone shouldered the vast majority of the tax burden, which was the reality. They didn't pay for all, but they did pay for most, right? Let's keep it honest here. Now, let's hear a little bit from the people themselves.
The white people have paid lots more taxes for schools, highways, and the other necessities of life than the colored people have paid. But we have no regret about that, because we have tried to be a help to them.
Many of his fellow Atlantans, however, expressed plenty of regret.
Where would the Negroes be if it were not for the taxes of the white people? Very few of them pay any taxes.
Let's get some more. What's coming up next is from a segregationist pamphlet.
Do you know that Atlanta's population is 1/3 Negroes?
I apologize, good people of the planet. I forgot to warn you that it's getting wild today.
They are paying 5% of the taxes and receive a strong margin of 75% of the tax for their race.
Here it comes.
I believe in them having good things, but in their own Negro sections. And I believe in them working by the sweat of their brow, as God states in the Bible, instead of handouts from white organizations, welfare office, etc. Give them about $50 of white people's tax money for every illegitimate youngster they have. And do they breed fast? A majority of Negro women have no morals and breed like swine. And the white people of the city are taxed to keep them and their illegitimate offspring up.
Oh, snaps. Now, next is a piece from 1957, and it's essentially whites mocking what they believe to be prerequisites of becoming an NAACP member.
I believe in equality, that niggas is better than white folks is, and that the white folks should pay more taxes, and us niggas should have more and more welfare.
In a similar vein, this segregationist poem made the rounds in the city.
Poor white folks must labor between sun and sun to pay welfare taxes whilst we has the fun. We don't pay no taxes. We don't make no goods. We just raise little niggas way back in the woods. They pay us to vote and rewards us to sin, while them sweet Democrats keeps the checks coming in. We waits every month for the slips and the figures, and that's all we do. We is damn lucky niggas.
Who feels bothered by any of this? If you do, that's completely normal. But it does mean that there's still a lot more inner work that needs to be done, right? And that's what these commentaries are for. Now let's hear some more. For angry whites, the implication was clear.
Shall you continue to pay for their pleasure, while they sit in the shade and spoon in the moonlight, multiplying like rats? We continue to bleed ourselves with heavy taxes to carry the socialistic burden of feeding and clothing them. They do not remain as slaves, and therefore are certainly not your wards.
This one next is from a group in 1958.
We are faced with the problem of encroachment upon our community by the Negro race. If our community is lost, then who will be the loser except you, the property owners and taxpayers? You cannot, as a property owner, taxpayer, man, woman, or child, sit by and let this situation go as it appears. You must have the intestinal fortitude to stand up and fight these battles wherever and whenever you can.
And the battle was real because Negroes were coming up. Time, the law, and reality were all on their side, and whites realized it as it unfolded. Because of their refusal to share these public spaces with blacks, whites essentially made their old complaint come true. Their taxes were being used to fund services enjoyed largely by blacks. Whites refused to acknowledge that this was a result of their own racism, however, and instead blamed the city for surrendering these public spaces to blacks. But you have to understand that this was how the consciousness in these people had been trained for centuries. So for it to have to face a reality of not only having to share public spaces with blacks, but also funding the spaces, this pushed their consciousness into a crisis that it was not built to handle. In the eyes of working class whites, the progress that the mayor and his allies often bragged about had come at their expense, in the losses of their neighborhoods and their public spaces, as well as in the price they paid in taxes. They knew the mayor and his wealthy white allies had sold them out. This was clear to them. The poor working class whites didn't previously realize that people who are primarily about power and profits, like the colonists, many politicians and business people, they'll use all sorts of tools to get what they're after, including people, right? The colonists used the poor Europeans as tools to hold down the Negroes. And they did that by selling them the white identity. Now the poor whites here in the 1950s, who had bought all the way into it and believed it the most, they're now the ones being used again and sacrificed by the people who they believed to be their white brethren. All right? Let's keep going. One Atlantan, for instance, told Hartsfield that he and his neighbors were sickened by what the mayor called progress. They saw it another way.
Many of the progress viewers now live in the county outside of the city. You see, their neighborhoods were taken over by the Negro race.
And what happened to those neighborhoods?
Their neighborhoods became slums.
They went down into the pit. The neighborhood went down into darkness.
I will certainly give the mayor credit for giving one of the largest swimming pools in West End to the Negroes and replacing it with a pool about the size of a pocket handkerchief.
As such stories made clear, Many white working-class Atlantans believed that their losses had actually been caused by the city's pursuit of progress. That's what the mayor and the white elites trying to make Atlanta appear progressive, so more money would be brought into the city. And for that rebranding to occur, something had to change, which meant that someone would be affected, and that someone was the working-class whites initially. The growing white backlash on issues of race and public space became clear in the battles over two bond initiatives in 1962 and 1963. The first bond issue called for $80 million for a number of improvements on schools, streets, sewers, and other public works, as well as proposals for a new civic auditorium and a new cultural center at Piedmont Park. Whites, angry over the loss of their old public spaces, refused to pay for two more spaces that would be used by blacks. Oh, you know they had to be on fire when they heard this, because most of the money did come from them. But blacks would be the ones who primarily benefited from it in their eyes. But the good thing for the whites was that this was something that needed to be voted on. And apparently 58,000 people showed up to vote, right? And these here were the results. Basic improvements in schools and street works lost narrowly, but plans for the auditorium and cultural center died in a smothering defeat. They said, get it the heck out of here. The auditorium and the cultural center, they tried to work their way from being a plan in the world of imagination to being a manifested reality in the physical world. But it died in a smothering defeat, meaning it was aborted in the world of images. It needed human hands to cross over into the physical world, because humans are the gatekeepers for much of what gets created physically. Right? Many things can't get to this realm without a human. And that includes the cultural center and the auditorium. That's why when they voted no, the plan died. The tax burden for the projects, one man complained, would rest on 90% of the white people while blacks would get most of the benefits. Others agreed.
I think that this is another step where the taxpayers are tired of paying hard-earned money for things that they will not be able to enjoy because of the prospect of forced integration, which means that the facilities would be used almost entirely by the Negroes.
So that's why they didn't make it to the physical plane. It was too much energy resisting their birth. The white revolt over the loss of their neighborhoods, their golf courses, their buses, their parks, and their pools represented only the beginning of the white backlash. Notably, the desegregation of these spaces had largely affected only working-class whites. They were the ones living in neighborhoods like Mosley Park, Adamsville, Kirkwood, and Adair Park, where the transition troubles had been unfolding for well over a decade. They were the ones who relied on public transportation to get from those neighborhoods to work. They were the ones who needed public golf courses, parks, and pools to relax outside of work. And thus they were once again the ones most impacted by the desegregation of those public spaces. The next stage in Atlanta's desegregation, however, centered on another public institution, the public school, which was just as close to the hearts of middle-class whites as it was to working-class ones, if not more so. As the city's struggles over segregation entered the realm of education, white middle-class Atlantans found themselves flirting with resistance for the first time. The public school is where the battle in the city gets spicy, because now it's time for Negroes to reach out and touch somebody who wasn't expected to be touched. And we're going to see how they reacted in the next commentary. Okay? I thank you for your time and attention. My name is Brooklyn St. Michael, and I'll see you in the free world.